Hi, my name's Sam. Welcome to Pig Pounder Brewery. Our goal here is to provide classic English ales and high-quality craft beers in a unique environment. Our whole purpose is to build appreciation for beer in general, and we're doing that alongside our two sister restaurants, Daryl's Wood-Fired Grill and the Marshall Free House next door. Our main emphasis is on providing the most high-quality beer possible, and so our ingredients are a huge priority, and we're not cutting corners on ingredients or processes. If you'll follow me into the brewery, I'll take you through how our brewing process is done. Water is the most abundant ingredient in beer, so water quality is hugely important to brewers. We have chosen to avoid using Greensboro city water in favor of using well water, which we truck in a converted Army surplus trailer parked outside from a well in Summerfield. We have avoided using the city water because it eliminates a couple issues. For one thing, filtering out things that tend to be in the city water, and also the consistency of the chemistry of the city water. Our Greensboro city water supply is fed off of 2 or 3 different reservoirs under normal conditions, and sometimes can draw off of even other water sources. So our water chemistry can be apt to change at any given hour. By drawing off of a natural well, we have eliminated the problem of consistency in water chemistry. The other thing we would have to deal with using the city water is filtration. The city water would contain a certain amount of iron from running through the many pipes that make up the city water system. And the city also treats the water with chlorine, fluoride, and some other treatment chemicals that we would have to filter out. By controlling our water supply, we're able to create an exact water chemistry that makes for the most consistent possible beer brewing process. If water is the most abundant ingredient in beer, then malt is probably the most important ingredient in beer. That's because malt is where we get our fermentable sugars from. Without malt, we don't have fermentation, and without fermentation, we don't get beer. Malt is, for the most part, barley, although it can be almost any cereal grain, that has undergone a process called malting. During malting, a maltster begins the germination process for the seed, and the seed produces certain enzymes that we use in brewing to break down starches in the seed into simple sugars. All of our malts come from Thomas Fawcett and Sons maltings in England. They are all grown in England and malted there on premises. Thomas Fawcett and Sons is a very traditional maltings. The company dates back to the mid-1700s. Their current production facility was built just before 1900. They're keeping a very old brewing tradition alive, and their malts create a perfect base for our English-style beers that we're focusing on here. What I have in my hand here is what we would call a base malt. This is what is going to comprise about 80% of the total grain bill that goes into a given batch of beer. This will provide most of the fermentable sugars, but very little in the way of flavor or color to the beer. In order to get flavor and color, we use what we call adjunct malts. These are malts that have undergone more extensive kilning processes, typically, or have undergone different treatments. And we'll use those in small amounts to create exactly the flavor profile and color of the beer that we want. Our malt is milled in a Kunsel mill in order to crack the husks of the malt, and then it's augured through this pipe right here up into our grist case, where it remains until we're ready to begin the brewing process. This is our brew house. It's a 7-barrel brew house. Over on this side, we actually have two tanks that are stacked on top of each other. The lower one is our hot liquor tank, where we'll store our water at a high temperature to be ready for the brewing process. When we are ready to begin the brew, we will open up a trapdoor in our grist case and at the same time begin running hot liquor into our mash lauter tun, which is this upper vessel. The mash lauter tun has a screen at the bottom, and as the malt blends with the water, it takes on a kind of consistency of porridge. Our mash is going to then sit there in that mash lauter tun for about an hour while the enzymes do their job of producing all those wonderful sugars for us. At the end of that time, we will then begin collecting our sweet liquor, or the liquid from that vessel, in our kettle here during a process called our runoff. After we've collected as much volume as possible from that mash, we will begin our boil. In the meantime, our spent grain, or the solids left over from the mash process, will get dumped into a hopper to be collected later by a local cattle farmer. The spent grain is actually about 20% protein and contains a good bit of other nutrients that are good for cows and other livestock, so it's actually a highly valued animal feed. When we begin our boil, this is the point that we'll add hops. We'll add hops both for a balancing bitterness and also to add aroma and flavor to the beer. Our bittering hops will not create what you would think of as a bitter flavor, but instead will help to balance out the malty sweetness of the beer. In the end of the boil, we will add hops for aroma and flavor. The aromas and flavors are typically coming from essential oils in those hops. Those essential oils are volatile and would be driven off if exposed to prolonged heat, and that's why we add them in at the end of the boil. After a 70 to 90 minute boil, we will transfer all of what we've produced in there, which we'll call wort, into one of our fermenters to begin the fermentation process. After we transfer our wort from the brew house over into one of our fermentation vessels, we'll add in yeast, which will begin the fermentation process. Because we are doing ales mostly, our fermentations last between 5 and 7 days and will occur at 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the fermentation process, we will begin dropping the temperature on the beer to begin conditioning. Our first temperature we'll hit will be 54 degrees, and at that temperature we will actually fill casks directly out of our fermenters. The casks are a traditional way of preparing and packaging beer that's very typical for English ales. It actually involves creating a secondary fermentation inside the cask. Temperatures are also carefully controlled, as this cask will never get below 51 degrees. We've set aside this cask cooler especially to provide the correct environment to allow that secondary fermentation to happen and to properly store our casks. After we've drawn those casks off, we'll continue to drop the temperature in our fermenters down to in the range of the 30s. Once there, we will hold that temperature for about 2 weeks of total conditioning time. At the end of that period, we will filter or clarify the beer otherwise and transfer it into one of our bright tanks in our cold storage. This is our cold storage room, the home of both our bright tanks and all of our packaged beer. Once in the bright tanks, the only thing left to do with the beer is to adjust the carbonation to the proper level. At that point, the beer is essentially ready to package or serve. We package our beer in this cold room in 1/6 barrel kegs, half barrel kegs, and of course our 64 and 32 ounce growlers, which are available for purchase in the tasting room. This is also where all of the draft beer that is served in the tasting room is stored.